What if I told you that the worst thing a narcissist ever did to you was never actually about you? Every biting insult, every cold betrayal, every silent treatment, and every cruel word served a very specific purpose, but it was not the purpose you think. Today, you are going to discover the uncomfortable truth hidden beneath the surface of narcissistic cruelty. You will understand why hurting you provides them with something they desperately need, and why realizing this changes everything about how you begin your journey toward healing. If you have ever wondered why someone who once swore they loved you suddenly became cold, dismissive, or intentionally mean, please stay until the very end. The answer is not found in the specific words they said to you. It is hidden deep inside what they could never admit, not even to themselves. If this conversation helps you make sense of experiences you have struggled to explain, please subscribe and join our community. Every single week, we break down the psychology behind toxic relationships so that you can stop blaming yourself and start seeing the patterns clearly. One of the hardest truths to accept after experiencing narcissistic abuse is that the pain inflicted upon you was never a true reflection of your value. It feels deeply personal because the attacks are directed at your character, your emotions, your appearance, your intelligence, or your deepest vulnerabilities. Over time, it becomes easy to believe that if you had been more loving, more patient, or somehow just better, the abuse would have eventually stopped. But this belief completely overlooks the psychological reality that drives narcissistic behavior. Their actions are rooted in a profoundly unstable sense of self that depends on constantly protecting a fragile ego. When they experience insecurity, criticism, rejection, or even the slightest possibility of losing control, they scramble to find a way to relieve the unbearable discomfort burning inside them. Instead of confronting their own fears or accepting any level of responsibility, they redirect those painful emotions outward. The closest person in their life almost always becomes the easiest target because they know exactly where to strike. They study your hopes, your fears, and your emotional needs, then use that hard-earned knowledge as a weapon whenever they feel threatened. Their cruelty is far less about who you actually are, and much more about what they are desperately trying to escape within their own minds. This explains why they may treat entirely different people in remarkably similar ways, despite those individuals having completely different personalities. The pattern follows them because the source of the problem is something they carry with them everywhere they go. Understanding this does not excuse the abuse, nor does it magically erase the damage it causes. It simply shifts the focus away from the destructive question of what is wrong with me, and toward the far more accurate realization that you were caught in the emotional storm created by someone who simply could not tolerate facing their own internal insecurity. The moment you stop measuring your worth through their distorted behavior is the moment their version of you begins to lose its power. For a narcissist, emotional pain is often used as a tool of control rather than just an accidental consequence of conflict. Most healthy relationships are built on a foundation of mutual respect, compromise, and emotional safety, where disagreements are resolved through honest and open communication. A narcissistic individual, however, frequently views relationships through the lens of power. The question is never, how do we solve this problem together, but rather, who has the upper hand? When they sense that their influence over you is slipping, they may resort to behaviors specifically designed to destabilize you emotionally. This can include the silent treatment, harsh criticism, gaslighting, public humiliation, broken promises, jealousy, or sudden emotional withdrawal. Each of these tactics creates uncertainty, causing you to focus less on your own needs and more on regaining the narcissist's approval. As the confusion grows, your self-confidence begins to shrink. You may start overanalyzing every single conversation, apologizing for things you did not do, or walking on eggshells just to avoid triggering another painful episode. This shift is exactly what strengthens the narcissist's position. The more emotionally exhausted and self-doubting you become, the easier you are for them to influence and manipulate. Even brief moments of kindness after long periods of cruelty can deepen this cycle, creating a false hope that the relationship is finally improving while reinforcing your emotional dependence. Over time, you might start to confuse simple relief with actual love, believing that the sudden return of affection means they have genuinely changed. In reality, the unpredictable alternation between warmth and hostility keeps the relationship emotionally off balance, making it increasingly difficult for you to leave. Control is maintained not through any kind of genuine connection, but through uncertainty, fear, and your constant pursuit of emotional stability. The narcissist often experiences this dominance as a form of reassurance that they still matter, that they still possess influence, and that they can shape another person's emotional world whenever they choose. It is a cycle that revolves entirely around power rather than authentic intimacy. One of the greatest misconceptions about narcissistic behavior is that they feel threatened only by direct criticism or rejection. In reality, your personal growth, your emotional stability, and your increasing independence can become just as unsettling to them. A narcissist often feels most comfortable when they believe they are the absolute center of your emotional world. If your confidence depends on their approval, if your life decisions revolve around their opinions, or if your happiness rises and falls with their mood, they experience a very reassuring sense of control. The moment you begin developing your own unique identity, setting healthy boundaries, pursuing meaningful personal goals, or finding fulfillment outside of the relationship, that sense of control begins to weaken. To a psychologically healthy partner, your independence would be something to celebrate and encourage. To a narcissist, however, it may feel like a direct threat to their own importance. They may respond by criticizing your ambitions, mocking your achievements, questioning your judgment, or creating unnecessary conflict whenever you experience a moment of success. Sometimes they become distant or dismissive during your happiest moments. They do this not because your accomplishments lack value, but because your growing confidence serves as a painful reminder to them that you no longer rely on them for validation. This shift can awaken deep underlying fears of being abandoned, ignored, or exposed as being less significant than they desperately want to believe. Rather than processing those fears honestly, they often attempt to pull you back into a position of self-doubt. They may remind you of past mistakes, compare you unfavorably to others, or subtly undermine your confidence until you begin questioning your own abilities again. Their goal is not always conscious or carefully planned, but the pattern always serves the same purpose. If you doubt your own strength, you are much more likely to seek reassurance from the very person creating the insecurity in the first place. This allows the narcissist to restore the imbalance of power that feels familiar to them, replacing your growing autonomy with renewed emotional dependence and preserving the control they fear losing most. One of the most confusing aspects of narcissistic behavior is how confidently they accuse others of the very qualities they struggle to acknowledge within themselves. This psychological process, known as projection, allows them to distance themselves from painful emotions they simply cannot tolerate. Deep beneath their carefully crafted image of superiority or confidence often lies an intense hidden fear of being inadequate, shameful, rejected, or a total failure. Instead of confronting these uncomfortable feelings, they unconsciously assign them to someone else. If they secretly feel insecure, they may repeatedly call you weak or incompetent. If they struggle with their own history of dishonesty, they may accuse you of being untrustworthy. If they harbor deep, green-eyed envy, they may insist that you are the one who is jealous. These accusations often seem completely irrational because they are not based on objective reality, but on the difficult emotions the narcissist is trying to escape. Over time, this constant stream of blame can become deeply disorienting. You may find yourself spending all your time defending against claims that do not match your actual behavior, questioning your own memory, or wondering whether you really are the flawed person they describe. This confusion serves another vital purpose by shifting attention away from the narcissist's own behavior and placing you in a permanent state of self-examination. Meanwhile, they avoid the painful and necessary task of looking inward. The more you focus on proving your innocence and defending your character, the less energy you have left to recognize the unhealthy, toxic dynamics unfolding all around you. This is exactly why conversations with a narcissist often feel circular, exhausting, and pointless, with the burden of responsibility continually redirected away from them and onto your shoulders. By understanding that their behavior is a desperate attempt to manage their own internal chaos, you can begin to stop taking their insults and accusations as personal truths. You were never the problem, and you were never the one who needed to change to make the relationship work. Their cruelty was always a symptom of their own inability to exist peacefully within their own mind. As you move forward, keep this perspective close to you. When you feel the sting of their words or the weight of their manipulation, remind yourself that you are looking at a reflection of their own internal battle, not a statement of your value or your potential. Your strength lies in your ability to recognize these patterns for exactly what they are. Every time you refuse to internalize their projection, every time you hold on to your own reality despite their gaslighting, and every time you prioritize your own growth over their need for control, you are reclaiming your life. It is not an easy process, and it takes time to unravel the conditioning that happens in a toxic dynamic. But it is entirely possible to move past the confusion and the self-doubt. You are capable of defining your own worth, building a life centered around your own happiness, and surrounding yourself with people who value you for who you really are, not for how well you can serve their fragile ego. Continue to trust your intuition and protect your peace, because you deserve to live a life free from the weight of someone else's dysfunction. You have already taken the most important step by seeking the truth. And from here, your path toward healing and clarity belongs only to you. You are more resilient than you know, and your value remains entirely intact regardless of the storms they try to create around you. Understanding how projection works helps explain why their criticisms can often seem so strangely disconnected from reality. Their words frequently reveal much more about the heavy emotional burdens they are carrying inside than they do about the person standing right in front of them. Recognizing this pattern certainly does not erase the deep emotional impact of their attacks, but it can help you stop internalizing accusations that were never an accurate reflection of your character in the first place. Before we move on to the next part of this discussion, take a moment to share your own experience in the comment section below. Have you ever reached the realization that someone was not actually trying to win an argument, but was instead just trying to hurt you? Your personal story might be the exact thing that helps someone else recognize the patterns they have been living with for years. And if you are finding genuine value in this discussion, please do not forget to like the video and subscribe for more psychology-based insights that will help you protect your emotional well-being. One of the most painful realizations for people who have experienced narcissistic abuse is recognizing that their own natural emotional reactions often became part of the very cycle the narcissist relied upon. This does not mean you caused the abuse, and it certainly does not mean that your feelings were wrong. Anyone who is repeatedly exposed to criticism, manipulation, or emotional neglect would naturally react with feelings of sadness, anger, confusion, or fear. The difference is that a narcissist may interpret these very human reactions in a way that is vastly different from how a healthy person would. Instead of seeing your tears as a signal to show compassion or seeing your frustration as a meaningful opportunity to resolve a conflict, they may see your emotional response as clear evidence of their own influence over you. Your visible distress reassures them that they still have the power to shape your internal emotional state. This sense of control can temporarily soothe their own deep-seated insecurity, which unfortunately means your reactions unintentionally reinforce the unhealthy dynamic. That is precisely why they may continue to provoke arguments long after the original issue has been resolved. They might repeat hurtful comments, deny obvious facts, bring up old mistakes from the past, or deliberately push the specific emotional buttons they have learned about you over time. The goal of this behavior is not necessarily to solve a disagreement, but to create an emotional response that confirms they still occupy the absolute center of your attention. Even intense negative emotions can serve this purpose because they demonstrate that your focus remains fixed entirely on them. Over time, many people become trapped in a never-ending cycle of explaining, defending, pleading, or trying to make the narcissist understand the pain they have caused. Unfortunately, these efforts often produce very little lasting change because the interaction itself can reinforce the narcissist's sense of significance. Breaking this pattern does not require you to suppress your emotions or pretend that the abuse did not hurt. It means gradually redirecting your emotional energy toward your own healing instead of continually seeking validation, accountability, or empathy from someone who repeatedly uses your vulnerability as a measure of their own importance. At the beginning of a relationship, a narcissist may seem deeply attentive, affectionate, and genuinely invested in your happiness. They notice your dreams, they mirror your values, they shower you with compliments, and they create the feeling that you have finally met someone who understands you completely. This stage can feel incredibly validating because it satisfies a natural human desire to be truly seen and appreciated. However, this idealization is often less about truly knowing you as a person and more about securing your admiration, your attention, and your emotional investment. As long as you reflect back the image they want to see, the relationship may appear almost perfect. The shift begins when reality inevitably enters the picture. You express a different opinion. You establish a healthy boundary. You need some emotional support for yourself. Or you simply stop providing the constant, unearned admiration they crave. Instead of adapting to the normal give and take of a healthy relationship, the narcissist may interpret these ordinary human moments as personal threats. The admiration they once enjoyed no longer feels guaranteed, and their disappointment is quickly redirected toward you. Gradually, their compliments become harsh criticism. Their affection turns into cold indifference, and their patience gives way to stinging contempt. Qualities they once praised may suddenly become glaring flaws in their eyes. The independence they claim to admire may now be labeled as selfishness. Your natural kindness may be dismissed as a sign of weakness. This dramatic reversal leaves many people desperately trying to regain the loving person they met in the beginning, often believing that they somehow caused the change. In reality, the shift often reflects the narcissist's inability to maintain an idealized view of another person once that person becomes a fully human individual with their own needs, imperfections, and opinions. Rather than integrating both strengths and flaws into a balanced perception, they may swing between extremes, seeing someone as entirely wonderful one day and entirely disappointing the next. This pattern creates constant emotional instability, leaving the other person constantly striving to earn back approval that was never based on unconditional respect or genuine emotional intimacy in the first place. A narcissist often works very hard to create a carefully managed public image that earns them admiration, respect, or sympathy from acquaintances, co-workers, extended family, or even close friends. To those people, they may appear charming, generous, successful, or exceptionally confident. This image is not always entirely false, but it is usually incomplete. It highlights the specific qualities they want others to see while concealing the insecurity, manipulation, and emotional volatility that only emerge in more intimate relationships. The people who spend the most time with them are often the first to notice the stark contradictions between the public persona and the private reality. This is why someone who begins recognizing these inconsistencies can become deeply threatening to the narcissist. It is not simply that you know their flaws. It is that you have witnessed the uncomfortable gap between the image they project and the behavior they so desperately hope remains hidden. When they sense that you are no longer accepting the version of reality they have constructed, they may intensify their manipulation in a frantic effort to protect that image. They might accuse you of misunderstanding them. They might portray you to others as unstable or overly sensitive, or they might begin a campaign to discredit your credibility before you ever have the opportunity to speak your truth. In some cases, they will work to isolate you from your supportive relationships, making it much more difficult for others to compare experiences and recognize the recurring patterns. Their fear is not only that others will discover the truth, but also that they will eventually be forced to confront the parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. Maintaining that carefully crafted facade becomes more important to them than preserving trust, honesty, or emotional closeness. As a result, relationships may become increasingly focused on protecting appearances rather than resolving genuine problems. The closer someone comes to seeing behind the mask, the more likely they are to encounter intense defensiveness, hostility, denial, or desperate attempts to rewrite history, because preserving the illusion often feels safer to the narcissist than facing the vulnerability hidden beneath it. The most important truth to remember is that the narcissist's desire to hurt you was never evidence of your weakness. It was always evidence of their own inability to cope with their own emotional reality. Every attempt to control you, to diminish you, to confuse you, or to make you question your own self-worth revealed far more about their inner world than it ever did about yours. The more you understand these patterns, the less power they have to define your story. Knowledge has the power to transform confusion into clarity, self-blame into self-compassion, and fear into true confidence. Healing begins the very moment you stop asking why you were not enough for them, and start recognizing that no amount of love, no amount of sacrifice, and no amount of perfection could have ever filled the deep emptiness they refuse to face within themselves. Your greatest victory is not making the narcissist regret what they did. It is reclaiming your peace, trusting your own judgment again, and building a life that no longer revolves around their approval or their rejection. When you choose boundaries over chaos, when you choose self-respect over self-sacrifice, and when you choose truth over manipulation, you finally break the cycle that once kept you emotionally captive. The person who once believed they could control your emotions eventually discovers that they can no longer control your future. And that is the one outcome they never expected. Because the strongest response to manipulation is not retaliation, but a life lived with clarity, freedom, and unwavering self-worth. If this discussion helped you understand narcissistic behavior in a new way, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe for more psychology-based insights, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. Sometimes a single insight is enough to help someone stop blaming themselves and finally begin the process of healing.